Hi, this is Arik,
And Aurelia.
and we're here to talk about life and interesting things.
Or so we think, but in the end, you will be the judge of that.
Well, either way, what we have to talk about in this episode is
Ageless.
Awesome. So I want to. My first question for this episode is, I guess I want to talk a little bit about the difference between what is right and what is correct in life with different kinds of things, because we were walking along the water the other day, and it was like we were talking about something, and then it was the idea of what is right and what is correct came into the air, and so I was just like, oh, this would be a really good idea for ages. So I wanted to ask you, like, is there a difference, and if there is, what is it?
There's a big difference because, let's say you have certain statues, or let's say you're a person who follows orders. Then the correct thing to do is to follow order. Like if you are in the position of an underling, then that's the correct thing to do.
Like if you work for a company or something, or like...
It doesn't matter, whether...
Or the law.
Yeah, whether you work for the company or are in the military or...
Orders.
Orders.
Yeah, okay.
But not everything that's correct may be the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, obviously the biggest example that comes to mind is like the Holocaust, like all these people like did the correct thing because they followed orders.
Wait, what do you mean?
I don't know. I saw this film once, or it was a documentary, I think, about like Eichmann was his name. He was like some guy who ran a concentration camp, and he just insisted, that he did nothing wrong because he just followed orders, which means to the T. So what he did was correct. Now, was it right?
Mm-hmm.
I really don't think so.
Not at all. Wait, what do you mean he ran a concentration camp? Like you could like run them like as like a franchise or something?
I mean, don't put me on the spot with my history knowledge. That I doubt that. But I mean, this was like a thing that needed a boss. Somebody who coordinated and
right, like in recruiting the whole Nazi movement and whatnot.
No, like in the concentration camp, like they needed, I guess, resources that they needed to make sure that the people would be shipped here, or that, I mean, just running it like a company.
And yeah, exactly. That's what I thought. Like a franchise or something, like where there's these orders, and this guy in this documentary that you saw had these orders to do this, and he did them because he follows orders.
Yeah,
and he was following the correct orders that were being given to him, but it wasn't the right thing to do.
Clearly not, because killing people, is never the right thing.
So people who follow orders then, like, can you say, like, they just don't speak, or they also don't speak for themselves, but yeah, I guess, like, on all levels, like, they don't think for themselves, they don't speak for themselves, they just follow orders. Mm-hmm. What kind of people are that? Like, what kind of people do that? Hard to say.
I really don't know. I mean, you ask me these questions. I have to say, from my father's side, I'm a real rebel myself. My grandfather...
rebellion is a...
My grandfather was in a concentration camp himself because he didn't want to be politically correct. At the time, saying Heil Hitler, that was politically correct. And he would say he wouldn't do that. And so he ended up in a concentration camp and as a political inmate. And my dad... I mean, given was very, very young. He was only like 14 or 15, almost at the end of the war, when he got drafted.
Mm-hmm.
Because, they needed soldiers, like they would take anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad ran.
Yeah.
Because he said he's not gonna kill anybody because that would be the correct thing to do following the orders he's been given. He said, like, the right thing for him was to not kill. And so he ran and he lived for more than a year AWOL in the Alps.
That's amazing. I mean, what a real hero. And that was the right thing to do.
Yeah, but it wasn't correct because if they would have caught him, he would have, been shot to death.
So that was right for his destiny, but correct for, like, I think, like, if you do the correct thing, you're just following the karma of the order. But if you're doing the right thing, like, you're being like that rebel. Like, you bring up that energy of rebellion. Or do I have that mixed up?
I don't know that it's necessarily rebellion. I mean, it could be.
It could be. If the correct thing is wrong, then it's rebellion to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's really interesting. I mean, I could probably do like a whole series just on that, but like what I want to ask though, but then like, can you have like social orders?
Yeah.
Is that what politically correct is?
Definitely. I mean, I hate to bring up my grandfather again, but
it's very good. Yeah, I like that because I'm really interested in. I think that's really interesting, actually.
I mean, this was all really, really interesting then to hear the stories about that. So, first of all, like my grandparents, like from my grandmother, she was fairly wealthy. She, was well off and everything. But then, because my grandfather didn't say Heil Hitler, right? Like, he didn't join the party and he didn't want anything to do with that. And they put him in the concentration camp. Then the, like, socialist party people, like the Nazis, like, which is like the National Socialist Party, like the Democrats at the time, like they would then move in and they would take like her money, her possessions, and like I cannot remember clearly. I think they could live in one room in their big house, but everything else was taken away from them, and that was that. Either way, at the end of the war, my grandfather was freed, like by happenstance, like at that march, what it's called, like, he survived it. And then, like, the social pressure that, he first didn't follow the social pressure. He said, I don't care if my whole village says Heil Hitler. I cannot do it. So I'm not politically correct. But then...
We'll just say HH going forward, because every time you say that, I get like, I cringe. So just say HH.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, what's HH?
That stands for this thing that you're saying that your grandpa wouldn't say.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I see.
because it's like, I don't know if it like triggers past life something, like it scares me. So just say HH because every time you say it, it's very scary.
Okay, so HH, he wouldn't.
Yeah. Thank you.
He wouldn't hail that man.
Yeah, perfect.
So anyhow, and then we know after the war, there were the Nuremberg trials and stuff like that, where like. People who would say HH and did the correct thing by following orders and like ratting out other people and putting them to death and that was all correct. It was not right, but it was all correct.
I mean, I can't even wrap my mind around that.
They were put to trial. And of course then everybody said, well, I didn't do that. Oh,
they lied, yeah.
They lied. And from there on out, my grandfather was like an outcast because nobody in his little town wanted to be reminded that he knew that they all did it.
Yeah.
And he was the only one who didn't, and he paid the price, right?
I'm gonna subtitle this episode "Speechless." It's like, whoa, man, that's intense. Like, I don't even know. Like, I have to process that, because that basically means that he saw them doing the quote unquote the politically correct thing at the time, because I mean, let's face it, the politics in Germany at that time were not right.
No, they were not, but it was politically correct to say their age.
Yeah, age, and this was also like so many. I mean, sorry, maybe I get a little bit, I divulge a little bit, but I think because I'm just trying to process in the background everything you're saying. But like, so like, the politics of Germany at that time were really bad. They were not correct, and that was because there was enough voices to give it power. Do I understand that correctly? Because there was enough mass. Like, what makes it correct? That's enough people thinking that it's right with this wrong karmic view, right?
Absolutely.
That's what this is about. And then your grandfather said, no, I think for myself.
Yeah.
Even if I'm not correct, I think for myself. And they wanted to kill him for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he said, I don't care. I will not conform to something that you think is correct when it clearly is not right. And, and taking away the freedom of speech, this is always the first sign of a bad situation.
Was there freedom of speech in Germany?
Before that man with the age?
Yeah.
Of course, freedom of speech was there.
So it's that mass amount, that like Albert Einstein says, what is popular is not always right, or
that's right.
And what is right is not always popular.
Yeah.
Or whatever he says. But, that's kind of like that energy, and like to really stay true to yourself, and to, in that sea of quote unquote correctedness, which is a karmic view, and not having the big view, the big picture. And then I think people just jump on that, like they were jumping on that train of being quote unquote correct, so that they could express their frustrations, what that H-man was triggering within them.
Yeah, and also because
the Hitler guy was doing, just so that we're clear.
Everybody was like, I assume, was afraid to say, to speak their truth, or to do what's right, like my grandfather did, because not everybody was willing to lose all their, wealth, and then, end up in a concentration camp.
I mean, it's hard to... your grandpa's a real hero, because it's hard to do that. Because especially for social or business or educational, like all kinds of opportunities will go out the window.
He was done for the rest of his life. First of all, I'm sure experience like ending up in a concentration camp is not something you can get over easily, but he also really didn't want to have anything to do with anyone anymore.
What was his sign?
Scorpio, I think.
Oh, yeah. Like a phoenix from the ashes. Yeah, I can see that. Scorpio already has a very hard time trusting people. So this is like... That just solidified it. Just solidified it.
But this is how, bad things get momentum, and because nobody dares to say no because they're afraid to be ostracized. If we're now just looking what's happening in the United States right now, for me, that is a little bit similar. I'm pretty sure that there are many, many people who do not dare to speak their true mind out of fear to be ostracized.
What possibly true mind could, like, I mean, I'm sure you're right, but, like, I think a lot of people are speaking their true mind.
I don't know. I mean,
what true mind are you referring to?
that all life matters. No, and that does include black lives. But I mean, to single out black
if you wanna
life at
go
the
there-
cost of, all life, then I'm sure that's not right.
Well, the argument is that and I'm just coming from a neutral point of view, but, like, the argument is, as moderator, the argument is that if there's a house on fire and then the house next to it is not on fire, and the house on fire represents, in their example, represents black lives, and then the guy with the house that's not on fire says all lives matter, then that's like disrespecting the house on fire that says black lives matter.
I'm not quite sure that I understood that example, but what I understand is, like, yes, there may be a house on fire, and I do everything to make sure that that fire is put out.
Yeah, that's the whole idea behind the Black Lives Matter, to put out the fire.
Yeah, well, I agree with that.
And so the argument is that when you say all lives matter, it takes away from Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, and I disagree with that. That to me is politically correct rhetoric, because black life is part of all life, in my perspective,
No, I agree. Mm-hmm. I absolutely agree, and I feel like, saying Black Lives Matter is like, just, it subconsciously triggers racism.
It's very racist.
Mm-hmm. It's very racist to say that, because it's just like, why make it about black lives?
And not about life.
And not about life, because I don't see color.
Yeah, me either.
That's the thing. And so I'm just like, what?
And I
don't get involved in all that because I'm not racist.
I'm not racist either, and I may say to our listeners, who do not know me from scratch, but I am the widow of a black man. Mm-hmm. So, I kinda have been reverse discriminated a lot, and I also have been discriminated. I mean, I will acknowledge that, but none of that was right.
Mm-hmm.
None of that. Discrimination and separation is never right. And no, I'm also not political. I'm just, coming from my heart, and from my heart, all life matters, and I cannot make a distinction about this color does, and thereby saying the other color does not.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, astrologically, people are just looking for an outlet for their anger. They probably don't even really care about, what's really going on, because racism is not something new, especially in the United States. This is actually one of the karmas of the United States that they still need to resolve. It started with, actually before Abraham Lincoln, but, he really, he was politically incorrect, and he freed the slaves. That was very politically incorrect of him.
At that time. But it was the right thing to do.
Yay! It was the right thing to do, and that helps with the karma of that land has that karma of racism. And it's not anything new, and it's just really sad and disgusting that it's where it is where it is now. It's like, okay, you guys, you really need to work on it, but here's the thing. Why now? Why right after COVID-19 started to go down? Because it's all just a big scheme to refill with negative energy. That's what's really going on.
Yeah, I just was about to say that, because I remember when you did the forecast of the COVID-19, and you said, well, this chart is very unstable and it will disappear like that.
Yeah.
As fast as it came. And, if then it stays away, that depends on how we are handling the aftermath of it. And right now, I don't think we're handling it very, very well. I mean, I
We can
want
do
to
better. We can do better.
I want to say, Arik is teaching like this really rocking class about the planets of pandemic. And there, you pointed out like so amazing, like the different steps, that force us in this time to purify. Let's just call it that.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about all these consequences and stuff and everything that's going on after this short break, because I need some water. We'll be right back after this. This episode of Ageless is brought to you by Aurelia Essential Oils. Wellness for you and everyone around you. Available on aureliaessentialoils.com. Alright, so we are back with Arik.
And Aurelia.
And we rarely ever talk about, political things, but we're not talking about political things. We're talking about spiritual energies.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so this is just kind of like, we see how those energies are manifesting.
Excuse me, I have to say that then. I really would hate for this to be misunderstood that we are talking political or taking political sides or something. This is really just to see the difference between, thinking for yourself, which is a prerequisite of spirituality, and following a mass concept.
Okay, so there is, that is really amazing that you're talking about that right now, because there's this, there's like these speculations from these two guys that I really respect, and it's really like just talking about all the different kinds of energies, how the generations, how they turn and stuff, and I really find it so interesting from an astrological perspective to see how the planets go and everything. But one of the questions that he asks is, and this is really interesting how you bring it up with spirituality, or how I heard it, is that which would you prefer? That government should reinforce the principle of self-reliance or the principle of community?
Wow, that's really an interesting
And this
question.
is something that he asked them, like Americans of all ages. I mean, you and I, in 2014, you and I have talked extensively about this. And even I think we had one episode where we did talk about it, or I can't remember if it was an on-air or off-air podcast, ageless conversation. But, for our listeners, that I'm just telling you right now, really obviously, as you know, I'm very much the pioneer spirit. Everyone go on their own, and, no safety net. You either make it or you live in the street. That's just how I am. Or you find somewhere where you can take orders.
Yeah.
And you work for someone who will take care of you and stuff. And you are very much more very good for the community sense. But that's, I think, because you have European background and I'm from America. You're from Germany, so you're raised with kind of like this sense of communion, where I'm raised with this sense of American dream kind of thing. However, studies have shown the millennials, the up and coming generation, they are very much community based, and then the baby boomers, they were very pioneering, right, and very trailblazers, and so they are aging out in positions of power, and this is going to change from self-reliance to community. More more community-based kind of consciousness is essentially what I'm talking about. And myself, having lived in Europe, I'm kind of ranting a little bit, but having lived in Europe now for so many years, I've come to actually see the value and appreciate this community approach, even though it's a lot of taxes and there's a buttload of bureaucracy and paperwork, because obviously, for our listeners, we own businesses on both continents, and I see the difference, like how much taxes you pay in Germany versus how much taxes you pay in the States. And I mean, it's just, I could go on, and people are always like, oh, the healthcare system, everything's so much better in Germany. Yes, it is, absolutely it is, but there's also all these downsides to it too, and there's pros and cons to each. But I guess it's just summing up, like, with this question about self-reliance and community, and community is where it's going in the States. It's gonna, in the future, I could totally see that it's gonna become more like Europe, and then it's gonna change again. It's not gonna last, but it'll change again. So, like, what do you think? Like, just going back to that question, would you want a government that's kind of like promoting self-reliance or more promoting community? Sorry for the...
I don't know. I mean, if it's like at all possible, I would like to take the best of both worlds.
Mm-hmm. So explain the best of both worlds.
Well, the best of both worlds to me would be that, my government model, so to speak, is self-reliance, but within that, I am... Well, not like everybody, I mean, each and every I that makes a society.
Mm-hmm. Say is here.
Mm-hmm. Is so evolved, I may want to call it, that without having all that bureaucracy and all that red tape and everything, knows how to take care of your fellow man.
Mm-hmm.
That the community part would come like with free will, with that self-reliance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm... Okay, so... I think that's amazing, but I do believe that the government, you need to have it that with that structure, exactly how you said it, that the government encourages self-reliance, because then within self-reliance you can establish community.
Yeah.
And I'm all for that, like with my companies and our employees and everything. I'm a Cancer. I like to take care of people, but I want to take care of my people, and I want the choice to do that rather than the government enforcing me to be communal. Mm-hmm. I think the government needs to trust the people first to be self-reliant, and then within that self-reliance there's that energy of community. Yeah. And I don't think it works the other way around.
Yeah, I agree, it doesn't. And I mean, speaking then about us, I think we're really good employers, and maybe just as a little example, I mean, we were really bending over backwards and investing so that we didn't have to send our people on Kurzarbeit, or
short temporary work.
Yeah, well,
during Corona.
Yeah.
I mean, we were working hard during Corona.
Very, very hard.
We were working really hard.
Yeah.
Because we have these wellness products, and it helps people, and also just with the panic and the anxiety and helping with wellness. I mean, we were working really hard. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But then, we had to make sure that, we couldn't have our brick and mortar stores were not opened, and there were all these regulations that we had to observe and stuff like that, and still we really tried to take care of our people, and that's what I mean. And that was totally voluntary, because from the government, we would have had every right to cut their pay and send them home.
Yeah. In America, if someone does something wrong, you can fire them right on the spot. And in Germany, there's no such thing.
No, you can't.
You cannot.
Hardly ever fire
You can't
anyone.
say, you're fired, and then you can't do that. You can't do that. Like,
you can say it, but they take you to court.
Yeah. Like you can't do that. And I mean, I'm just like, but even if they do X, Y, Z, nope, you can't do that. It's really intense, and I see the benefits. So yeah, thank you for answering that question. I think it's really interesting. I think what I'm really getting at is just from an astrological, metaphysical perspective. We've also been talking about that, but I think it ties in really nicely here, is that the realities are splitting. Mm-hmm. And, to our listeners, you can choose where you want to go. You can go down the path of hatred, or you can go down the path of love. And the path of love is not for the faint of heart. The path of hatred is very easy.
Yes.
It's very easy. It's the easy choice. Every time you don't like someone you see on the street, every time you don't like your neighbor, really all comes down to, that's what it's about. Hatred's not about these gross displays of, what you see in the press and in the media and stuff. It's like, no, you see someone on the street, you don't like them, that's hatred. And so you can choose where you want to go. And I just, I really want to encourage everyone to choose love as much as possible, because, and also to really get to know what love is, because what you think is love is probably not love. At least, probably not so much for the people who are not listening to this. But,
it's a good one.
But it's really, that path of hatred is not looking good.
No.
And I can really foresee, the American dream, it's dying in that reality. It's going to become something else. And, but, you can still be in America, but just in a different reality, I guess, is kind of where I'm going with this. And obviously we know it's spreading worldwide, so one pandemic's being replaced with another. And I wrote about that also, how we have pandemics all the time, and, the news just doesn't cover them, or doesn't cover them accurately. But, the next one's coming, and like Aurelia said, I'm teaching about that in my astrological planets of pandemic class. And
yeah, and what I feel I want to add to that with this, choose love, not hate. Even though, your hate may be justifiable because, you're doing this out of love for Black lives, which is really, as we've established, not so. It also, we have to say that there is a recurrence of astrological aspects. I mean, I'm not the astrologer of the family, but I somehow seem to remember that you have talked to a friend recently, and you were talking about that there is a constellation or an alignment that is pretty much the same as it was in 29 when the Great Depression started.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of generational planets hitting different points.
And let's not forget that the Great Depression was then what led to World War II, basically.
Yeah, you can read an article that I have, Uranus and Taurus, and yes, you're right, Aurelia. Yes, this is kind of where it's going, and I'm an optimist. I'm a very optimistic person, but I also, I don't deny the potential of evil, and It's a lot of that's going on. So yeah, you can read the Uranus and Taurus. I have also Neptune and Pisces. I talk about Pluto and Capricorn all the time, for the astrological guys out there, or girls, excuse me, and everybody.
Yes, thank you. Let's stay politically correct.
Yeah, and that in that case, it's also right. Yeah. Sometimes you can be correct and right, which is then, I guess, probably divine.
Oh, that was beautiful.
Because then you're protected. But, just food for thought, you guys. Just think about this. What orders are you following? Family orders, social orders. Those are the unspoken orders, that we have. And then, you have orders for work to do a good job. If you don't agree, then talk to your boss about it and say, hey, I think we can improve on this, or I don't think this is right. And then, be willing to listen.
Ethics,
be willing to
morals.
listen. If you don't think something is right, maybe you're wrong. And just be willing to listen. Have an open mind. You don't have to do what they say, But then be willing to learn. You know, we're in the month of Gemini at the time of this recording, so be willing to learn. Church orders, all kinds of things like you're saying, right? I love that. So just think about what orders you're taking, and do you think that they're right? And if you think that they're wrong, why are you doing them? You know, or if you want orders that are in alignment with what is right, then why aren't you brave enough to do them? So just some food for thought, and you know, something to think about until the next episode, if you dare to come back.
If not, you know, it's all my bad because I had to start talking about my rebel grandfather. But hey, such is life.
You're a very outspoken woman. We know that.
I am.
We love that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so you guys, thank you for listening to our episode of Ageless, and this has been Arik.
And Aurelia.
And you've just listened to an episode of Ageless. Be sure to listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Google Podcasts. We're pretty much everywhere online. See you guys next time. Bye.